Hi, Jackie Beatrice Blakely, graduate student, Master of Science in Marketing. The session I'm about to talk about is, I'm saying it that way because it's capitalized, Your Brain on Drugs, Neuroimaging Psychedelics. The three people in this session were Manoj Dose. He's from the University of Texas at Austin and works in the medical school center for psychedelic research and therapy. Shayla Love, she's a writer for The Guardian and specifically is a science writer. So kind of like, it was great to have her there because she sort of brought the conversation back down to earth for people, not back down to earth, but you know, all of like the really intense like molecular stuff. She made it tangible for the regular human being, AKA me. And then Max Vargas, who is from UC Davis Institute for Psychedelics and Neurotherapeutics. I just think mushrooms are interesting and psychedelics are interesting, especially we live in a state where that's recently became decriminalized. And I think that mushrooms get a bad rap and get put into a classification of drugs that they shouldn't really be in, and that there are a lot of benefits to them, or can be. And so I kind of wanted to learn, okay, like what actually are the benefits? Because I'll say that and then people are like, yeah, but what are they? I'm like, I have literally not a single clue. So this was very, very cool. So essentially we first went into like, what happened? You eat a mushroom, then what, right? Your digestive tract starts eating it up. The psilocybin gets absorbed, but the actual active, I didn't know this, the actual active ingredient in mushrooms is psilocin, which is actually able to cross your blood-brain barrier and then binds to receptors and activates neurons, a very specific one, the 2A receptor or something. Anyways, see, I'm getting into the weeds because it was a lot. But really interesting stuff. The first guy, Max, he talked about his research, which was about neuroplasticity and psychoplastogens. Essentially, I'm gonna boil it down to the main takeaways here because it's a lot, but essentially the research that he was able to prove and do is that the psychedelic effect, or like the psilocybin, but it's not really that, right? It's the psilocybin. The psilocin, there's a lot of words here, is membrane permeable and actually helps grow neuroplasticity in the brain, or causes an increase in neuroplasticity, which again, I think I put this in like big, letters. You don't need to take drugs to obtain neuroplasticity. You don't. But it's fascinating that these drugs actually do that. That's crazy. And you can increase neuroplasticity by having a really in-depth conversation, learning a language, all of these things. But this drug can do that too, which is wild. The other thing that he was researching, and you can see in literally the images of the neurons, it's neurons because it's like dendrites. Yeah, dendrites. So in people who have depression, which I've gone through, and it's not fun. Dendrites in your brain, because I'm saying we're specifically speaking about neurons in your prefrontal cortex. When you're depressed, there is an atrophy in these specific neurons. And with the use of psilocin, and obviously like the membrane permeable active ingredient in mushrooms, you can actually start to restore some of the atrophied and really worn dendrites, which is wild to me. And that's a tangible benefit And that's like, that's a fixing drug. That's not a Band-Aid drug. It's quite legitimately, from what I believe I've interpreted correctly from a lot of this scientific talk, is it literally promotes the growth of those weakened areas again. So to me, that's even more amazing, that these drugs are just super taboo for a lot of people, and really, like, people just hate on them when they could have such benefits to humanity and to population. And we're seeing depression rising all over. And what is that going to do to the long-term health of a brain? So that was interesting. Then we went into the second part of, we went into Minaj's research, and he studies he just studies more on humans, not like the molecular level really, but I guess he does, but really in humans. And he studies the paradoxes of psychedelics. And essentially he went into talking about how some people they called it the subjective experience of psychedelics, right? Because there's this tangible medical benefit of psychedelics, which is what I just talked about, but then there's this whole subjective experience and what these drugs do to the brain. And he was talking about how psychedelic experience, you can either get a lot of deja vu, or you feel like you're experiencing things for the first time ever, which are kind of polar opposites, right? But I won't read this quote out, but there's a really, really cool quote in here that you'll just see when you look at my notes. But it's by Anne Shulgin, who I think basically resurfaced a lot of psychedelic drug research. He went into like two different parts. You basically have episodic memory and semantic memory. Episodic memory is recollection of information from the past, like mental time travel. You know that these things have happened, but you can place them. Semantic memory is that feeling of knowing for facts and concepts, but you don't really necessarily know where they came from. Like, I know that George Washington was the first president of the United States. I don't remember where I learned that. Okay, I'm cutting back into the video now because Ian came home and then I got nervous to speak in front of people, which is weird because he's still here now. Essentially, what I was saying was the episodic memory and the semantic memory are two separate parts of the brain, right? That invoke different types of memory. Many other drugs, alcohol, weed, Ambien, affect both at the same time and have kind of like not a negative effect on both, but they sort of do negatively affect both. But psilocybin, whatever, mushrooms, thanks babe, he was correcting me, basically is the only drug that decouples the hippocampus and the cortex, which is crazy. Listen, for marketing, I'm not really positive how it ties back to what we're going to be doing in marketing, but I do think that this is going to be an expanding field, and I'm really fascinated by this medical field and what's going on in it, and I'd love to work in it someday. So for me, these are really fascinating conversations to have and things to know, because if I do work in this area, this is really good information to have as a baseline so I can talk about it.